Israel and the United States have had their occasional differences, but I want to assure you that the alliance between the world's greatest democracy, Israel and the United States, and a strong, proud, and independent democracy, but I want to assure you Israel, that in the heart of the Middle East, between the world's greatest democracy, nothing can change that. Strong, proud, and independent
Let's bring in Al Jazeera's political analyst Marwan Bashara joining us live from London. Marwan, there's a lot of speculation, of course, on what Netanyahu is going to do next. But how much does Joe Biden's advice to walk back from these legal changes actually kind of box Netanyahu into a corner at a point when he is trying to make some sort of compromise or claims because he doesn't actually seem to be capitulating to the US into a corner at a point when he is trying to make some sort of compromise.
Well, yes, as you said, it remains to be seen.
He doesn't want to be seen
but
to
clearly
be
there is a bit of a
president.
qualitative difference in tone and in severity. But clearly there is a bit of the American president's tone towards the Israeli Prime Minister. And in severity, you know, President Biden always prided himself to be a Christian but a Zionist and a very close friend of Netanyahu. Whom he knew since the mid-1980s, believe it or not, when Netanyahu was both in Washington and New York working as a diplomat. But the question today for Biden became, are you a friend of Netanyahu or are you a friend of Israel? Is the United States a friend of a prime minister or of a country where it invested some $150 billion over the past several decades? And I think the answer today or yesterday was clear that Biden needed to take some action and come out to the open and say that what's coming down or what's going on in Israel is not acceptable to the United States because it is contrary to presumably the democratic principles on which the two countries' relation is based on. So yes, that will corner Netanyahu, that will push him further to try to figure something out. But I think the question is for his detractors and for the oppositions in Israel whether they will accept to make a compromise with him or they sense that this is perhaps the time to bring him down.
We've seen a glimpse, at least, of some of the kind of compromises that Netanyahu is prepared to make. Itamar Ben-Gvir, the security minister, has been told that apparently he is going to, or proposals are going to be put forward for a national guard that he's been pushing for. But are there any indications at this stage that we're actually seeing a balance of power changing in the coalition and that that power is, at least to some degree, moving away from Benjamin Netanyahu?
This is a very good question, by the way. I would say it's a $64,000 question in the sense that we've only noticed that the former defense or present defense minister who basically spoke out against Netanyahu and his presumed reforms. And it's kind of strange that none of the others are, although there are reports in the Israeli press that, in fact, there are a lot of detractors now and that Netanyahu could lose his leadership within the Likud party. Now, this is important for a number of reasons. I'll tell you what. Because if Netanyahu goes, it doesn't mean it's going to be all dandy and well for Israel and for democracy or for the Palestinians, for that matter, or for U.S.-Israel relations. But what will be essential is that this barrier to a coalition among the secular right, the center-right, the far-right in Israel, without the religious and the fanatic Zionists would be possible. And I would say the following. Between Yisrael Beitenu and Blue and White Party, Likud, and of course, the fourth party, we would have a majority of 74 members. And they are all willing to come together only if Netanyahu is removed from the scene. So I think there are a good number of possibilities now that Israelis within Likud and within the opposition could start thinking about the day after Netanyahu. And by the way, that party was Atid party.
Al Jazeera's political analyst, Marwan Bashara. As always, Marwan, thank you very much indeed. In the occupied West Bank, a Palestinian child's been wounded after Israeli settlers attacked Bedouin families near Ramallah. Neda Ibrahim is in Taiba and spoke to the Palestinian families who survived the attack.
Members of this Palestinian family were asleep when a group of settlers attacked them in their bedrooms. They say they woke up terrified just before midnight to rocks being hurled at them and settlers attacking them with pepper spray.
The rocks are all over the house. Let me show you. They're here. We started looking after the settlers left and found one of the rocks under my head. We found it here under the bed. They either threw it targeting the windows or my head as I was sleeping.
When we go to report to the Israeli police, they ask us for a miracle. They blame us for not filming the attackers. It's as if they want us to locate the perpetrators, handcuff them, and bring them to the police.
This is not the first settler attack against Palestinians in the past week. Just a few days ago, a group of settlers put up a house on fire in a village near Ramallah, but the family luckily managed to escape. According to the UN, there's an average of 3 settler attacks per day against Palestinians. And they say that since they've started documenting these violations against Palestinians in 15 years, this is the highest number of settler attacks against Palestinians. Now, there are media reports that Benjamin Netanyahu is going to be granting the far-right National Security Minister Ben Gvir a National Guard. According to Palestinians, they believe that this is going to bring them a free hand for Israeli settlers to attack them. And according to the Palestinian Foreign Ministry, they say that this is going to be a racial militia that will continue to target and kill Palestinians. Nida Ibrahim, Al Jazeera, the occupied West Bank.
The US Senate has voted in favor of repealing war authorizations in Iraq. The resolution is going to return basic war powers back to Congress. The vote comes 20 years after the US invaded Iraq, essentially giving US presidents the power to use force in the country. The move's not expected to affect current deployments, and an estimated 2,500 US troops remain in Iraq. More foreign troops are arriving in Democratic Republic of Congo to boost the fight against the armed group M23. Calls from regional leaders for the rebels to halt fighting and withdraw haven't stopped the violence. And as Malcolm Webb reports, the government's now accused of using another armed group to fight M23.
Just 2 weeks ago, fighters from the M23 armed group held this hilltop. Then Democratic Republic of Congo's government forces fought them off it.
We were bombing Sake from...
The colonel showed us around. He told us it's from here that M23's fighters shelled the town of Sake down below. Most of the people here ran away, but now a few are coming back to collect crops and take them to town.
We cannot go further than here because the rebels are not far away. We used to go up into the hills to bring cassava and other foods, but now you cannot go there because you'll meet the rebels.
Congo's army says it's been fighting Rwandan soldiers here under the guise of the M23 armed group. Rwanda denies backing M23.
The government forces say that they're the ones who are now upholding the ceasefire and that M23 is not. They want to show us some of their positions. But the recent fighting near the town of Mweso is widely reported to be between M23 and an armed group.
Congo's army is widely believed to have supported armed groups in its fight against M23. The army denies it.
They say they're withdrawing, but they're reinforcing in other areas. M23 is playing a game and misleading regional leaders and the international community.
Regional leaders are sending troops under the banner of an East African force. Burundian soldiers arrived earlier this month. It hasn't stopped the fighting. More than 800,000 people have been forced from their homes as M23 advanced over the last year. Some of the people in this camp are from the town of Mushaki, which is one of the places that M23 says it's handed over to the Burundian troops.
We know the East African forces are there in Mushaki, but we also know they're collaborating with M23, whose fighters are nearby. This is why we're refusing to go back.
Back up in the hills, the colonel took us to the army's most forward position. A few hundred Burundian troops are meant to control the territory beyond here. But he says M23 fighters are still hiding in houses across the valley. Many people here question why the government hasn't done more to enable its own forces to stop M23. Now they're wondering if more foreign forces will actually help. Malcolm Webb, Al Jazeera, Lupango, Democratic Republic of Congo.
The head of the UN's nuclear watchdog has visited the Russian-held Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant in eastern Ukraine. Rafael Grossi is trying to negotiate a compromise with Moscow and Kyiv to protect the plant during the war. The International Atomic Energy Agency has staff stationed at the facility to minimize the risk of nuclear disaster. The plant's been targeted by shelling and it's experienced power cuts in the past year because of the war in Ukraine. King Charles is in Germany on his first state visit as Britain's monarch. He was welcomed by the German president. Charles is on a 3-day visit with his wife, Queen Consort Camilla. He had planned to travel to France, but that trip was postponed because of ongoing protests against pension reforms. And that's it from me, Rob Matheson. Don't forget the website, of course, aljazeera.com. The news is going to continue on Al Jazeera after Inside Story. Stay with us.
Hello there. We'll have a look to the Middle East and Levant, and strong wind is the story here, blowing out of the Mediterranean, bringing some blustery showers to the likes of Lebanon as well as Syria. Now, we could see some snow edging into northern parts of Syria and eastern Turkey, areas that were affected by that devastating earthquake. That wetter weather moving its way further east, bringing that wintry mix to the Caucasus by Friday. Some heavy rain and strong winds expected across northern areas of Iraq, pushing into Iran by the end of the week. Still blustery conditions blowing across some of the Gulf countries, but it is going to be much drier. Just a few spotty showers here and there. Some of the wetter weather affecting coastal areas of the Red Sea and western Yemen. Now, as we move to North Africa, it's a very dry picture here, windy as well, but lots of heat coming through for the northwest. Places like Morocco, Algeria and the Canary Islands, we are expecting temperatures to continue to rise by the end of the week in many areas. It's much cooler, however, for the likes of Egypt, 21 degrees Celsius maximum high in Cairo. For the wetter weather, we have to head further south. Those thunderstorms continuing to rumble across the tropics in Africa. Some heavy rain as well affecting eastern areas of South Africa. It warms up slightly in Cape Town.
The journey from childhood into young adulthood is speckled with tribulation. For youngsters like Rima, autism is another challenge to add to the mix. Armed with a loving family and a caring friend, she bravely lives, learns, and chases her dreams as she finds her place in the world. See Me As I Am, a witness documentary on Al Jazeera.
Both sides in Libya's war committed crimes against humanity and war crimes. That's according to UN investigators. They say the European Union was also involved. So who will hold them all to account? This is Inside Story. Hello there and welcome to the programme. I'm Nick Clark. United Nations investigators say security forces and armed militia groups in Libya have committed a wide range of war crimes and crimes against humanity. They say they have evidence of abuses carried out against Libyans and migrants stranded in the country. Commissioned by the UN Human Rights Council, the panel also accused the European Union of aiding and abetting abuses by sending support to Libyan forces. UN investigators documented hundreds of cases of murder, torture, rape, enslavement, sexual slavery, arbitrary detention, extrajudicial killings, and enforced disappearances. They found evidence that Libyan authorities curtailed rights to assembly, association, expression, and belief in order to ensure obedience and punish criticism against their leadership. And the panel said support given by the EU to the Libyan Coast Guard to intercept migrants across the Mediterranean Sea led to violations of human rights. Well, Libya has had two governments since 2014. A UN-led ceasefire in 2020 created hopes for peace, with both sides agreeing to hold elections. Abdul Hamid al-Libibi has been the interim Prime Minister of the UN-recognized Government of National Unity since 2021. He was supposed to be replaced after elections in December that year, but the votes never happened and has been postponed indefinitely. Tensions escalated between rival governments after the Tobruk-based parliament appointed Fatah Bashagha as the Prime Minister. All right, let's take this on. We can now get the thoughts of our guests. Joining me in Istanbul is Salah Al-Bakush, who's a political analyst and former senior advisor to the negotiating team of the High Council of States, as well as the High Council of State. In Brussels, we have Julien Oez, who is the EU foreign policy analyst and High Council of State, French Dispatch, and in Istanbul as well is Anas El-Ghamati, a founder and director of the Sadegh Institute, which is a political think tank in Libya. A warm welcome to you all. And Salah Al-Bakush, I'd like to start with you. The report really lays out a terrible situation, getting a great deal worse. To you all. And Salah Al-Bakush, I'd like to start with.
As far as the content is concerned, I don't think many Libyans or many international observers and human rights activists are surprised by what's in the report. The new thing is that this comes from a credible source. A lot of work went into it, and it provides a very neat package of facts. But that the EU is empowering some groups in Libya that are committing crimes and so on, not only against immigrants, but also against Libyans, especially people with political views and women. That's not new, so I'm not really surprised.
Julien, we'll come on to the criticism directed at the EU in a couple of minutes, but first of all, in general terms, this report, how serious do you think it is?
I mean, I think anything that describes any form of human rights abuse is incredibly serious in general. Whether, as Chaloka Bayani, you are not accusing the EU and the member states directly. If you look at our fundamental values,
bring what you do online with GoDaddy. Register the perfect domain for your business.
It's very serious to hear that any funding, any equipment, and anything provided by the EU is going to actually fund these.
For it to restore diplomatic relations with Saudi Arabia.
Accountability on
the Islamic Republic remains heavily sanctioned by the West, as the long process to revive the landmark 2015 nuclear agreement stays largely stalled.
And I don't think I need to exactly underline that I don't think anybody in the EU would be happy to hear that the funding being provided by the EU is being used to harm Libyans or migrants of any kind, and it's an awful thing to hear.
Right, of course, we must make clear that the report isn't suggesting the EU is committing human rights abuses, but it points out
That's Olympic champion gymnast Nikita Nagorny marching on a military parade at the Red Square.
Just tell us a little bit more about how that might be happening.
I mean, there's always a risk.
You may not know what SSL is, but hackers do, and they hate it. SSL helps protect your
processes for tracking expenses, and on top of that, when there are weak governmental structures, I mean, Libya's has been in a very tough situation for a while now, and the problem is that when there are weak governance structures and when there are weak institutions, which is de facto the case here, it's much harder to accurately track where funding and equipment and material is being sent, where it's being used, how it's being used, and what the goal is, because it's very easy to wave one hand on one side and take everything with the other. And it shows that what needs to be done is that the EU needs to increase its accountability and perhaps get more involved in the processes on the ground to make sure that the funding is being done. However, there should be one quick clarification on this point, though, is that according to Peter Stano, at least, who's the lead spokesperson for the EU External Affairs, the claim of the Commission is that the money is not being physically given to partners in Libya. It's actually being allocated and then utilized by international partners, including the UN. So we need to go through the entire report with a fine-tooth comb and look at where the problems are, where the money is going, and where this tragedy is coming from.
Yeah, Anna, so where do you stand on this? So it's interesting.
You may not know what SSL is, but hackers do, and they
European
hate
Commission
it.
spokesman.
SSL helps
If you just
protect
go
your
through what he
site.
says, he's refuting these claims that our money is going to finance the business model of the smugglers or of those who are misusing and mistreating people in Libya. He says, the spokesman says, it is quite to the contrary. Most of the money goes in order to take care of these very people, the migrants. How do you assess the whole situation? How do you assess the EU position in all of this?
Regretful, to say the least. I think nothing could be further from the truth. If you go to the report itself, it talks specifically about members of the Libyan Coast Guard, such as Bija, a well-known human smuggler who has now been part of the Libyan Coast Guard, formerly as part of that formal institution. So he's definitely received institutional funding and institutional material from the EU. But the report actually details that it's the relationship
You may not know what
between
SSL is,
the EU
but hackers
on the one
do,
hand,
and they
the Libyan
hate it.
Coast Guard,
SSL
and then the
helps
trafficking
protect your
networks that work at the heart and have compromised the work of the Libyan Coast Guard, not only for the last year, but for the last several years and over several governments. And I think that's where this report, for me at least, doesn't even go far enough. And one of the reasons why it doesn't go far enough is that if you look into the very details and the methodology of this report, it says that for a fact-finding mission that wasn't able to go and access detention sites in Libya, wasn't able to access southern Libya, which is the point of departure for a lot of migrants and refugees who first enter into the country. This report wasn't able to even to establish the hardest facts on the ground, so it doesn't go far enough. And it's only able to assert things that it absolutely knows on paper. And what we absolutely know is that there is indirect, and even at this stage, direct support coming from the EU. But in my mind, it doesn't call things by its real name. Know is that there is indirect and even behind direct support coming from the EU. Report, so it starts. But in my mind, it doesn't call things by its real name. Predates there is indirect and even behind. It was established in 2021, and it's actually quite in my mind individuals like Khalifa Haftar, who is the principal actor that has led